Donald Trump's election win has been good for tech giant Palantir shareholders, especially for founders Joe Lonsdale and Stephen Cohen, who are now billionaires. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, reporter Phoebe Liu. Phoebe, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
You have some big news from the company Palantir and how the election affected its shareholders. So let's start with the basics first. Palantir is a tech company started in 2003 by Joe Lonsdale, Stephen Cohen, Alex Karp, Peter Thiel, and Nathan Gettings. At its core, what does Palantir do?
Yeah, so Palantir, I think, would advertise itself as a data company. It helps really large and complex organizations kind of act as connective tissue to bring together data that's often really siloed, really hard to reach, and kind of put it together in a way that is very easy to access and analyze. And they use a lot of machine learning related models to kind of draw insights from the data that they help these companies collect. So its origin was actually, it started out with an investment from the venture arm of the CIA. So it has kind of its origins in defense and government contracting. That's still a very big part of what it does today, although it has since also expanded into commercial customers. I think JP Morgan was its first one in 2010, I think 7 years after it was founded.
So let's look back prior to the 2024 election. How was Palantir working with the American government? Because you said it had its origins in the CIA.
Yes. So that was, I guess, the first outside investor in the company. It was famously turned down by a lot of other investors, and now that it's doing so well, it's like, oh wow, like they didn't see that. I guess they didn't. So it started doing kind of secretive government contracting in defense and intelligence, and reportedly helped, for example, find bin Laden. And it has continued to work very closely with different arms of the U.S. Department of Defense, and its CEO, Alex Karp, has very publicly stated that Palantir is here to help, I guess, Western values uphold like American defense and American democracy, and do its part through kind of data wrangling, sometimes controversially, to make that happen.
Phoebe, we're Forbes, so we're always talking about the money. Can you talk to us a little bit about the trajectory of Palantir's revenue prior to 2024?
Yeah, so Palantir actually notably has very few customers because their customers are so big, like governments and really, really large other companies. I think it has about 600 customers. So revenue-wise, things are not super exponential. I think its revenue has grown by about 20% every year for the last 5 years. And its most recent quarterly report, which actually coincided with the day before the election this year, I think it reported $2.6 billion in revenue, which was just over a 20% increase from the year before. So financially, where Palantir has really taken off in the last year is in profitability. Notably, up until mid-2023, it was losing a lot of money. I think in the year ending in June of 2023, it lost $50 million. And from the most recent quarterly report through September of this year, I think it had a net income of close to $500 million. So really, really huge swing, shows that the company must be doing something right there, whether it's in cost cutting or securing additional contracts.
So give us some context, if you would. How does its growth compare to other tech or data companies?
Yeah, for sure. So like we just kind of discussed, because its customers are so large and kind of legacy players, it doesn't grow in the same way as other giant tech companies that work with a lot of consumer-based products. So I think some analysts that I spoke to for the story likened it to more of like a Booz Allen or Accenture type consulting company. So thinking about it more that way. And in a similar vein, Palantir is actually the most expensive stock as a multiple of its revenue on the entire S&P, which it joined in September. I think the last time I checked, it was trading at close to 55 times revenue, which is basically unheard of. So it kind of indicates that there's something beyond just financials, maybe, at least according to some of the analysts that I spoke to, driving the growth of Palantir's market capitalization.
So now let's talk about how the 2024 election fits in here. So leading up to the election, Palantir's leadership was really split on who they were backing. There was a difference of opinion. What did that look like, and who did the majority support?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the most high-profile example of this is Peter Thiel was kind of a pro-Trump person. He famously in this election backed J.D. Vance, who is now the vice president-elect. So that's really come into the spotlight here. Thiel isn't day-to-day active at Palantir, but he's still on the board and has a lot of voting control. So that was something people were talking a lot about. But notably, Palantir's CEO, Alex Karp, backed Harris in this campaign. And while both of them have said they're very good friends with each other and say that their views are more nuanced than the public often understands, there is kind of a difference of opinion there that I guess sometimes seems like a little bit of cognitive dissonance with the way the Trump campaign has framed like wanting to support U.S. defense, Western values, Western allies, as seeming to be a little bit more aligned with what Palantir is doing, which, I don't know, I guess there's a lot of nuance there.
Among Palantir's founders, Joe Lonsdale became a prominent supporter of Donald Trump. So how do you think this will affect his future in the defense space?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, for Joe Lonsdale and actually Stephen Cohen as well, the other newly minted Palantir billionaire, both of them started out at Stanford studying computer science, and they both worked for the kind of conservative libertarian campus paper that Peter Thiel founded. So they kind of come from that line of thinking, at least when they were in college. So Joe Lonsdale has definitely been the more vocal of the two of them. He has helped with the America PAC, donated money to Trump supporting causes, and has been very outspokenly in support of that. I think he tweeted or posted on X, "It's morning again in America," the day after Trump was reelected.
Something you said that was really interesting is that President-elect Donald Trump's proposed policies more closely align with Palantir's vision. So now bring us to November 5th and beyond. Donald Trump wins the election. What happened to Palantir's share price since then, and why did it happen?
Yeah, so there are a few factors at play here. So Palantir's share price was, I think, around $40 a share the night before the election, and now it's above 60, so it's up more than 50% in just a couple of weeks. Obviously, some of that is due to the election and Wall Street's positive response to that, and people kind of seeing, at least some Palantir investors have been saying that investing in Palantir is kind of a bet that a second Trump administration will invest more heavily in defense, and that will help Palantir financially. But there's also kind of a qualitative aspect to kind of investing in defense as a way of being more aligned with a very America First agenda, if that makes sense. Because Palantir's stock base is actually very heavily retail investor based. So in addition to it doing really well and surpassing analysts' expectations at its quarterly earnings report the night before the election, there's that kind of qualitative response, hoping that a second Trump administration will continue to help Palantir, if that makes sense.
A 50% surge in share price is just huge. So what did that jump due to the net worth of its founders?
Yeah, so the two founders that I focused on in this story, Joe Lonsdale and Stephen Cohen, very likely, at least by Forbes' estimates, became billionaires due to this jump. And Joe Lonsdale especially has been very vocal, even though he's not day-to-day active at Palantir anymore. He left in 2009 to start a different company, Adipar, which is kind of wealth management software, and it's also worth a couple billion now. He is very outspoken in terms of talking about his relationship to Palantir and invests very heavily in the defense space through the venture firm that he now runs, 8VC. So notably, I think I read a story in the Financial Times that came out today talking about one Palantir investor that said the kind of trifecta of stocks that are in line with Trump's win in the presidential election are Palantir and which is a defense company that Joe Lonsdale and Peter Thiel are both major investors in, and Tesla, which Elon Musk, obviously.
You mentioned this before, but I want you to touch on it again. Mm-hmm. What do you think a Trump presidency means for the future of Palantir and other companies in the AI and defense spaces?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's generally being seen as a positive. My colleague David wrote a really insightful piece on kind of Silicon Valley defense companies and their investors' reaction to Trump being reelected. So part of that, I think, is Trump wanting to decrease regulation, which I think will help kind of an entrepreneurial defense sector, something that Joe Lonsdale has called the new defense prime. That includes companies like Palantir and Anduril, which he and Thiel are very heavily invested in, and excludes companies like Lockheed Martin, which is a big legacy defense company that notably Palantir's market cap surpassed that of Lockheed Martin in this post-election surge, which I think goes to show kind of the old guard and new guard of defense companies. But yeah, so my colleague David's story gets into the details of that and people being really excited about Trump at least qualitatively being very pro-defense, even though he wants to cut government spending. I think it's optimistic in terms of venture capital and entrepreneur-driven defense and AI in this country.
You published your story at the beginning of this week on Palantir, and the markets have, since Trump was elected, have been reacting really favorably to that news. Have you learned anything else new since you published?
Yeah, so the day I published my story, I also learned that Palantir is switching what stock exchange it's listed on from the New York Stock Exchange to the NASDAQ, which also contributed to its spike in share price because it allows a lot of investors to sell and buy, and profit opportunity for lots of people is always a good thing. And it's been interesting seeing the stock continue to go up despite a lot of insider selling. One thing that I wanted to note is that Palantir's CEO, Alex Karp, has actually sold close to $1 billion worth of Palantir stock since the election. There could be lots of reasons behind this, political or otherwise. The most likely is probably that he has a trading plan with an automatic price trigger. The price went up, so it crossed the threshold, therefore he sold a lot of stock, but that's something that analysts thought would lead to Palantir coming back down again or correlate with it in some way, but it hasn't yet. And I think it goes to show that Palantir is a stock that isn't really explained by a lot of the typical things that drive companies' share prices. And it will be interesting to see how it continues to play out, especially since it just won a big, close to $500 million contract with the Pentagon a couple months ago, and that will play out over the next 5 years and will definitely have interesting ramifications both on the company's financials and kind of U.S. defense and everything that happens in the world. So.
And I'm sure you will be following those stories very closely as they develop, and I hope you come back on in and join me and talk about them. Phoebe Liu, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you so much, Brittany.